Hey YouTube, Savon Draws here. Today we'll be going over how to set up Blender Grease Pencil for 2D animation only. My goal here is to explain how to use Blender for 2D animation and get into the 3D aspects later. So we're going to jump straight into it. We're going to open Blender and we're going to go to 2D animation. I'm going to load the default Blender settings just so I can show you guys how to set up the file properly. So before we even get started animating, we're going to edit our preferences so the application can work well for us. The first thing we may want to start with is setting up our buttons on our pen tablet so that it will work well for Blender. So we're going to add Blender to our applications. We're going to put one of our buttons as right click, as it's pretty necessary for you navigating through Blender. So we're just gonna hit right click and OK. It may look different on your tablet settings. Then you can also add middle click to your tablet pen, as middle click is used to navigate through Blender a lot as well, though it won't be necessary because we're going to do something in Blender to circumvent this. So now we're gonna go back to Blender. We're gonna go to Edit Preferences. From here, we'll hit Emulate Numpad. This will just allow us shortcuts that are restricted to the numpad on a keyboard if you don't have a numpad on your keyboard. And then we're also gonna hit Emulate 3-button mouse if you did not set your pen tablet to the middle mouse button. When we do this and we set the 3-button mouse to Alt, we'll be able to use all the controls that we need the middle mouse button for just by holding Alt instead. I personally don't use either of these two options, so I'm going to take them off. From here, we'll go to Tablet right under here, and we can increase our softness. I recommend doing this later, and this will change how much input we get from pressing with our tablet pen. We'll then go to Key Map and tap Tab for Pie menu. This allows us to click Tab to change modes in Grease Pencil. Grease Pencil works in a way where we draw in a different mode, then we edit, and there are about 4 modes that you may generally use when animating. From here, we'll want to set our middle mouse action to pan rather than orbit. If we have it set to orbit, it will orbit around a 3D space. So instead, we'll want to set it to pan, so we just move around a 2D canvas. We'll then want to go to System and make sure that Blender is set to a GPU if our computer has one. This will help with the optimization of the program. You can also set your undo steps, the amount of undos you'll be allowed. We'll then want to go to Save and Load and hit Autosave if it's not already checked. And this will just be the timer we have in between autosaves. We can also hit Save Version so we can save more than one autosave if you want to. To be able to see where these autosaves will go, we'll go to File, we'll go to Recover, and then we'll go to Autosave. From there, we'll go to Add-ons, and we'll type in Grease Pencil. We're going to want to check Grease Pencil Tools, which should automatically be installed. And from there, we'll set whatever we want our Rotate Canvas shortcut to be. So right now it's set to Control Alt middle click. I'm going to change mine to Shift Alt middle click just by checking. And now, before you rotate, you'll want to hit N, go to Grease Pencil, and hit Save Rotation. So when we rotate, we'll be able to get back to our original state. So now I'm going to rotate, and we see that our canvas rotates. Then we'll just hit Reset Rotation from the save the rotation we had. Then we'll want to go to timeline scrub and see what our shortcuts are. We can also change the shortcut just by clicking this button right here. Right now it's set to Alt and middle mouse. And as you can see, it goes to the timeline. We can also then check our layer navigator button, which should be Y. And this just allows us to create new layers and edit layers, visibility, as well as lock them and change their order. That's everything for this preferences, so just hit save preferences. It should auto save even if you don't. So now we're going to hit tab and go to draw mode. I'm gonna erase this here. And now before we draw as well, we'll set up the correct options for our playback. So we're gonna go to playback, we're gonna hit audio and check scrubbing. On sync, we're gonna hit sync to audio. We're then going to go to the scene tab on the side and put render down to 4. This will just make your scenes perform well and export better. If you ever want more visual quality, you may want to turn this up a little bit, but it's not too necessary considering we're working with 2D drawings. We're then going to hit simplify, and that will be about it for the playback. A quick note is that we have 4 different versions of how we'll see our animation up here, which are the different viewports. The one on to the most right shows the final output of our animation. However, we can't see onion skin in this view, so we're always going to want to draw on one of these 2 views. Another note, if your animations are ever performing with low FPS, you'll want to hit object mode, go to the camera, select the camera, and then hit play with the space button. And then your performance may increase rather than when you're selected on the grease pencil. So now to get started with animation, since we're already in object mode, we can hit add, we can go to grease pencil, and we can click blank. This will create a blank grease pencil. It will be automatically selected. If we ever want to change, we can just hit whichever object we want to select on the collection on the right. We just made this new grease pencil, so we're going to select that. Just so you know, to switch on any object, you need to go to object mode and then select the object. From here, since we've selected the new grease pencil, we're going to hit tab and go to draw mode. So now that we're in draw mode, we can see the controls for the application. We can zoom in by dragging up or down on the magnifying glass, or we can simply hit command and middle click, or command and alt. You'll have to hold it while you do it to zoom in. This can also be done on the timeline. You can pan with the middle mouse or holding alt. Same for the timeline. You can also just stretch the timeline by clicking on the little circle, or zoom in, and then you can scroll through the timeline with the bar. We'll see that if we move this around, it will orbit the 3D space. If you ever get stuck in 3D space, you can just hit 0 if you enabled emulate numpad. You can just hit 0 or 1 to return to your camera view, or you can just go to the camera view button and click it and you return to your regular view. We're going to also want to go to color management and make sure it's on sRGB and standard. Now we're going to want to right click camera mirror flip and hit add to favorites. We're also going to want to right click reset rotation and add to quick favorites. we then can start setting up shortcuts so we can go through the application faster, as changing modes can be the biggest time waster in Blender. So for drawing, I always assign D, as it's right under E. My ideal is for all my shortcuts to be on the left side of my keyboard. I assign eraser to E, fill to W, cutter to C, and I leave the rest unchecked. I then also assign draw mode to D. So anytime I want to draw, I can just hit D to change the mode, and then I'm immediately on the brush most of the time. And then for the other modes, you can set your own shortcuts. Now, as you see, we can switch freely between the modes. Now we'll want to switch to edit mode, and we're going to go to mirror X global, and we're going to add quick favorites. Also going to do camera mirror flip and reset rotation again, as different modes have different quick favorites. X global will reverse your drawing when it's selected. If you ever want to bring up your quick favorites, just hit Q. In edit mode, I'm going to hold the select box and go to select lasso, and I'm going to then click assign shortcut. Then you can assign shortcuts for the rest of these tools, which I'll leave alone for now. Now, if we have anything drawn, we can just delete it with X, go back into draw mode, download and import. We're going to hit the side menu and hit download and import texture brush pack. This will just give us extra default brushes for Blender. You can navigate through these by hitting your drawing tool on the top left, and you can just hit down on your keypad to navigate your brushes. You can also navigate your brushes on the end menu and the menu here. Now we'll hit edit. Now we'll hit file, defaults, and we'll click save startup file twice. I'm not going to do it because I already have a different startup file. This will make sure that all of our preferences and shortcuts are saved the next time we enter Blender. If you ever want to add anything to your startup file as well, you can just add things to the program and click save startup file again. Now we're going to go through the drawing mode tools. So in drawing mode, we can draw, of course. We can erase. And there are 3 modes for erasing. So we can erase. We'll also hit F anytime we want to change the size of our cursor. So as we can see, this gradually erases like a regular drawing program. And when we're on dissolve mode, on point mode, it destroys points. So points are seen in edit mode when you're on point select, which is right here. If you zoom in, you'll see that there are these little dots that are points. So point erasing destroys these points. I find this to be the best way to erase in Blender, the most accurate way for me. And there's also stroke erase, which will just destroy the whole stroke. So it counts each stroke as separate, even if they overlap. So if you were to delete a bunch that are overlapping, it will delete them all. But if you just want to hit one here, it will delete that. Right. You can use this when you want to erase things very quickly. Then we also have cut. The cut tool. The cut tool will destroy any intersecting lines wherever you're cutting at. This is really good for cleaning up animations. Then we also have a bunch of different shape tools. They're also affected by whatever brush we have set on. So we'll change the texture. We can move the points. Also move the axis of rotation. We can flip them by hitting M. You'll also see different controls down here. You can extrude it and make a new line with E. And then you can finalize your shape by hitting the middle mouse button or Alt. You can also cancel it mid-drawing by clicking the right click. All of the shapes can be controlled like this. We have our Interpolate tool. This will create keyframes. This will create animation in between when you make two drawings and change its location, size, or rotation. So here we can click on our keyframe and click Shift D. We can go to our next keyframe by hitting up. Then we can go to Edit Mode. We can go to Stroke Select. This will select your whole stroke. And you can move it with G. If we were to go back to drawing mode now and hit the Interpolate tool, we can choose a point in between these two drawings and it will make a keyframe there. That's the in between of the two drawings. You can do this on every frame. So now we have 3 in between frames. You can also use the Interpolate tool on Edit Mode. But in Edit Mode, it works differently and becomes more automatic of animation. So if we hit Command Shift E while we're in between two keyframes, or if we just go up to Grease Pencil and hit Interpolate Sequence, it will create a bunch of in-betweens animations. We can also change how these will interact by changing the amount of steps. This will create more frames in between each drawing. And we can change the way they move, the way they're eased, which will change the speed of the ending or beginning of the automatic animation. Now to change our colors, we could always use color attribute and just select our colors like a regular drawing program. However, it's not as simple as that in Blender. Colors are controlled through materials. While we can make a stroke here, we can't fill our stroke unless we make a material. As we see, when we hit fill, nothing happens. And this is because we don't have a fill material. So to control materials, we'll go to the material tab on the right. And this is where we can create different materials. So fills and strokes work separately. Strokes work as your general lines, and fills fill a drawing like this. And this is the drawing mode on a fill material. Fill materials can also fill in lines. The best way to fill in lines, I would recommend setting your boundary to edit lines, and then it tends to be very accurate. If your lines ever fill over your stroke like it did here, you'll want to select the stroke and then hit arrange, bring to front. If that doesn't work, hit arrange and send backward and send to back, as it may be selecting the fill. Let's see which one works. And then if we go back to drawing mode, now the stroke is on top of the fill. So those are two shortcuts you may also want to set on edit mode. So I said bring forward and send backward. If bring forward and send backward, you may have to hit those buttons multiple times if you have multiple strokes. For bring to front and send to back, I just set them to my quick favorites. Now you can control the color of your fill or stroke by just going to your material, selecting it, and then changing the color. This will also change the color of your material if it's already made. So anytime you want a new color, you'll have to make a new material unless you use the color attribute mode. The color attribute mode will let you freely select colors, but when you change the material color, it won't change. As you can see, the color attribute works on a different color palette than my material. And I can change colors however I want. Now we can also have a stroke and a fill on one material. And then we'll have a stroke color and a material color. We'll have a stroke color and a fill color. If we ever want to change a drawing's material, we can just select the drawing and then select the material and hit assign. Even if you assign a color attribute drawing, the color will not change. You may think this is hard for painting, but you can also paint inside lines by going to the tint tool, and whatever color is selected on your color here will tint your already drawn stroke or fill. In my opinion, this works much better with strokes because with fills, it starts to tint the whole fill. However, with strokes, it gradually changes the color based on your brush cursor, like a regular drawing app, as if you were alpha locked. You can also get more options out of this by going to the vertex paint mode, which I won't be going over if you experiment. If we ever want to delete all these, we can just go to edit mode, hit A to select everything that we currently see, and then hit X, and then click points or stroke to destroy what we've drawn. Now, if we want to enable onion skin, we'll have to click the button on the side of the layer. We can hide the layer with the eyeball icon, and we can lock the layer with the lock icon. We can control our onion skin by going to the layer panel, changing the opacity on the onion skin, adding how many keyframes before or after you can see, and changing the mode from frames, keyframes are selected. We can also change our layer order by hitting up or down on the layers here. Unfortunately, you cannot change the layer's position from here. It will just select both. You can also change the layer's hierarchy by hitting Y and dragging up or down. You can also make new layers over here. Now, if we were to go here, we can go to fade and active layers. So the layer we don't have selected will become more opaque and transparent. Now, if we were to reselect it, this layer would become transparent. can delete our keyframes with X and then hit delete keyframes. Even though the layer disappears when we delete all of our keyframes, it still exists when we go to our layers panel. If we draw, while auto keyframe is enabled, it'll automatically show the layer again on our timeline. You can disable auto keyframing from here. Auto keyframing automatically makes a keyframe anytime you draw. If you were to disable automatic keyframing and you draw here, your drawings would all remain on the same frame. And you can turn it back on. We can set the beginning and end of our timeline by hitting playback and hitting set start frame. Then we can also hit set end frame. This can also be changed by going to the output menu and changing the frame range. As you can see, it's been changed to 1 in 15, which I just changed. Now it will just play this amount of the animation on the timeline. We can enable multi-frame to edit multiple frames. When we select them, we'll be able to edit all of them. So let's say we wanted to change the position of them. We could select all and then move them, and now they're all in a different place. We'd also change the size, rotation, and we can even fill multiple frames all at once. But before we fill, we'll have to click U or go to the material tab and change to a material with a fill. It's possible but that Blender will think your strokes are unclosed, in which case you can hit Alt. You can hold Alt on the fill tool and draw the rest of your line and then hit to fill it in. If you want to get rid of these lines you just drew to close your drawing, you can hit draw, clean up, and then you can hit boundary strokes all frames if you want to delete on all frames. As we see, I can just, the ones that are already closed, I can just fill on multi-frame. And when we turn it off, the fillable ones are filled. Our last drawing mode is additive drawing, which will create a new frame from our previous frame and just add to it. So if I were to draw, if we were to zoom in on the timeline, we'll see that a new frame is created with my new drawing and my old frame is on the previous keyframe. In Grease Pencil, you can go about animating two ways. You can animate your whole animation inside of one object, or you can use multiple objects, which is the way I recommend animating different characters and separating backgrounds and objects. The general rule would be any object requires a new object rather than working on the same timeline. So we'd hit tab, we'd go to object mode, and we click add grease pencil blank. Then once the grease pencil is selected, we'd go back to draw mode and we'll draw. Now we can see, even though our new grease pencil is above our other grease pencil object in our collection, it's showing up behind on the camera. So what we'd want to do is we'd want to move this forward in 3D space. So we'll just go to edit mode. We'll hit transform, and then we'll hold G and Y and to drag along the Y axis to bring it to the front. Depending on where your camera is oriented, you might have to hit G and Z or G and X to move it along those axes. And now it's actually in front of it in 3D space. If we were going to go to the camera, if we were going to unlock the camera, we'll see that it's in front of it in our 3D space. If we ever want to move this one back in front, we'll go to Object Mode, select our other grease pencil, go to Edit Mode, and hit G and Y until it's above the other grease pencil object. Now to go over the controls for Edit Mode, it's pretty simple. Edit Mode will also create new frames when you change things if you have auto keyframe enabled. In Edit Mode, we have 3 selection options. I generally use lasso. Then we can move our objects with the move tool. We can rotate with rotate tool or R and drag. Please take note that these are all these changes on every tool are also happening in a 3D space. We can scale with the scale tool or S and drag. You can also hit Z, X, or Y while holding S or R to rotate or scale them across the X, Y, or Z 3D axis. We also have a scale cage, which is more like general 2D applications where you can use the different points to scale your object. Then we have the transform tool, which essentially combines all of these tools. We then have the extrude tool, which will extrude our drawing. We have the radius tool, or Alt S, which will change the thickness of our lines. Then we have the shear tool, which will shear our object around the origin point that we're seeing right here, the orange dot. Oh, sorry, that was the bend tool. And then we have the shear tool, which will use the origin point as well. Once again, we have the interpolate tool, which will translate 2 drawings to each other when you're in between them. You can go to interpolate and drag, or you can go to grease pencil, interpolate sequence, and it'll automatically do the change. Whenever you see these blue keyframes, those are interpolated keyframes. Our last important mode for general animation would be Sculpt Mode. Sculpt Mode also allows you to select. You can hit A to select all and then edit them. Or you can use different forms of selection like circle select by hitting C and then dragging. I suggest that you turn on the stroke or point edit modes, which will allow you to see what you're editing when you select. So now if we hit circle select again, we'll see in orange which points we have selected. You can also hit Alt A to deselect. Make sure you're hitting right click to finalize your circle select selection. And then we can edit these points. If you hit stroke mode, you'll be able to edit everything on a stroke every time you select. You can also do box selections by hitting B and then dragging over an object. Now we have both selected and we can edit both. Now sculpt mode is good because it allows you to essentially sculpt your drawing. So if we were to delete these, let's say 2 of our lines don't connect, we could go to sculpt mode, and I like to use grab the most. You can change the size of your brush and also how much it affects the drawing you're touching with the radius. Or you can change the radius or drawing brush size with F and dragging. And then you can change the strength, which will change how much it influences your stroke. So now we'll select the stroke and we'll hit grab around here to make these two connect. And then we can just keep editing it. And now we have a much better circle. But in sculpt mode, we can make this look even better. We can go to the smooth tab, the smooth tool. We can change our radius, change the strength if you need to, and it will smoothen out our drawing. You can really see its effect on less textured brushes. We can also change the thickness of our stroke here as well, and change the strength to see how much it will influence our drawing. We can do it multiple times. Then we also have the tools I don't use as much, like randomize, which randomizes your brush strokes. We also have the push tool, which pushes instead of grabbing. I find that grab just tends to work better. We have twist, pinch, and clone. Though I'm not quite sure how this works. We also have a selection lasso at the bottom that you can assign a keyboard shortcut to. When it comes to moving your keyframes, there are a few buttons you can use which are documented if you go into key and check any of the buttons. We can hit G to move our frames, the same way we can hit G to move our selected objects. And we'll only move the select keyframes. We can hit S to change the duration of our keyframes relative to where our blue mark on the timeline is. This will change the duration of the keyframes when we slide. You should be careful with this, as if your keyframes overlap, wherever you put the new keyframe will destroy your old keyframe. You can also, let's say you wanted to animate on 2s as well. You could do a bunch of keyframes on 1s. And then you could click S and then click 2. And all the frames will become a duration of 2 frames. Then you'll want to move them back to their correct position with G. You can also do this for 3s or 4s. We can also hit E to change duration relative to where our blue line is as well. If we put it in between 2 frames, it will make the closest frame be able to become longer. If we hit Shift T, we can slide our frames, though this generally makes them come out of order, so I don't like to use this option. We can also insert a new keyframe by clicking I. We can hit all channels to make a new keyframe on every layer, or we can do only selected channels to only make a new keyframe on our current layer. You'll have what to watch another video for an explanation on modifiers, but we also have effects and modifiers, which will change how our animations look. If we add blur, we can see that we'll get a blur effect if we go to the render view. Our modifiers and effects generally show more on the render view. Some of them will show on different views. We also have, so there are all types of effects you can aim to check out. If we ever want to add audio, we can click plus, go to video editing, and then hit video editing. Then we can find an audio file and import it. We can show the waveform by hitting display waveform, and then we can cut it by clicking K, by selecting it and hitting K, and deleting anything with X. We can fade the volume by hitting this dot to add a keyframe. We can change this to 0, so the volume will start at 0. Go further in the sound, then hit this diamond button, change it to whatever volume you want, and now it will fade up, and you can see this fade right here, this diagonal line. Of course, my animation is only in the first few seconds, so it'll only play here. If we wanted to see our waveform at the same time that we're animating, we'd have to add a new window where we can see the sound. So we'd have to go into the corner until we see this plus button and then drag upwards. Now we have a new window, and we'll change it to video sequencer, and here we can see our audio. We can also zoom in, make it larger or smaller, vertically and horizontally. And if it becomes distracting, we can just minimize it. Now we'll hear it in the playback if we have audio scrubbing set and checked. You can also set up your workspace by going into the corners of any part of the application where two different windows meet. So even if we wanted to, we could set a new one here just by hitting plus and dragging a direction. And now I'm seeing my collection up here. Windows you already have. You should be careful with this, as if you do it wrong, it will delete windows you already have. But it's no problem, as you can always just set them back by going to plus and dragging over another window. When you see it doing something like this, it's showing that one window is going to destroy the other window. This is also how you would set up different workspace settings. If you ever want to hide the tools or the side tools, just hit N for the side tools and T for your actual drawing tools. Now, if you want to export, you'll want to go to your render settings. And then if you want to make your animation transparent before exporting, go to your render viewport, and you go to film and hit transparent. Now we'll see that it's transparent. You must note that it will only be transparent in the render view and not in the other views. You can set your render number I recommend putting it lower for 2D animations. This will export it faster. From here, you can set the size of your animation. Right now, it's 1920 by 1080. You can change the frame rate. You can change the frame range. And then you can change the output. For right now, I'll set the frame range to 32. And I'll change all my animation so far. I'm just going to make it one circle that's on the screen, but I'm going to add some camera movement before I export. So to change the camera, you'll want to go to object mode again, and you'll want to select the camera. Now you can edit the camera directly and you'll see what's happening. You can hit N and you can just click transform and mess with the location and rotation. Or you can also just go to camera and change its settings. We'll want to start off by hitting I and then hit location, rotation, and scale. That will create your first camera keyframe. From here on, we can just edit the location from here. And we can hit I and hit location again. We'll also want to make sure we're on dope sheet so we can see all the camera keyframes. And now if we go back, the camera moves. If we want to make another in between, we can just move the camera down. We can just move the camera with these controls, and it will automatically generate a keyframe. So now it goes down and up and down. We can also change the rotation, though this is tricky unless you're looking at it in a 3D view. If you ever want to animate your camera in 3D, just go to General Animation, and then you'll see your render here and your camera over here. And then you can directly control the camera by clicking it or by clicking the same transform tools, and you'll see what's happening directly in the left. Now to export, we're going to go back to our render settings, and if we want to export transparent, we're going to make sure we have transparent checked. If we want to do a PNG sequence, we'll first decide where we're going to save on our laptop. I'm going to put desktop PNG. This is going to be your file name. Then we're going to want to make sure it's selected on RGBA, which will make it transparent. Anything else won't. This will be black and white. This will be color. This is color with transparency. Then we're just going to want to hit render and hit render animation. Then another window will pop up, and when it's done, you can check the location you saved it to, and it should be there. If we want to export a transparent video, we'll change our file format to FFmpeg video. Then we'll go down to encoding. We'll make sure it's on QuickTime. Then we'll go down to video codec, and make sure it's on QTRLE/QT animation. And if we want the audio with it, we'll go down to audio codec or input MP3 or AAC. In my experience, only AAC has worked on my computer. And then we'll hit render animation once again, let it play out, and it will be saved. If you want to export with your background, then you'll just go back to film over here, uncheck transparent, check that it's not transparent in the render view, and then we'll go back. And if we want a more regular video format, we'll instead change it to MPEG-4, which will change it to MP4. And then we'll put H.264 as the video codec. And then we'll hit render animation. It will play out. And then if I go to my desktop, I'll see that it's exported, and I can hit play. For this tutorial, I'm going to follow this tutorial up with a tutorial on using the 3D aspects of Grease Pencil, as well as the best add-ons to speed up your workflow in Grease Pencil, and advanced tips. If you enjoyed this tutorial, please hit the subscribe button. Consider checking out my Patreon and just hit a like and see what's next. Thank you, and I hope you have good luck with your Grease Pencil journey. But the Grease Pencil can be hard to get into, but it is definitely worth it once you're accustomed to using the software. Even though it's not beginner-friendly software, that doesn't mean you can't use it. You just have to work with it for a while.